Welcome to the discussion today. We're doing something a little different. We're focusing on how the Homeland Security Department is preparing to reopen its offices and continue to take advantage of the successes it achieved in having employees work remotely. My guests from DHS today are Angela Bailey, the Chief Human Capital Officer, Karen Evans, the Chief Information Officer, Tom Chalecki, the Chief Readiness Support Officer, and Rich McComb, the Chief Security Officer, all at the Homeland Security Department. We're also joined today by Eric Stahl, the Director of Security and Enterprise at Force 3, and Joe Lazaro, the Practice Manager for Collaboration, also at Force 3. Everyone, welcome to the discussion. Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. The number of agencies starting to bring employees back to the office has slowly been ramping up over the last month or two. The IRS, the State Department, the Environmental Protection Agency are among the agencies that are resuming quote-unquote normal in-office operations as safely as possible. But agencies have a long way to go to create confidence with employees. A June Federal News Network survey found a strong majority of respondents, both federal employees and contractors who are still teleworking, say they are, quote, very uncomfortable with the prospect of returning to the office, and another 15% said they were, quote, slightly uncomfortable with returning to the office. Among the concerns from employees and contractors are how to ensure social distancing, especially in elevators, how to ensure there are plenty of personal protective equipment like wipes, and what to do about common areas like bathrooms and break rooms. While many feel the returning to the office it may be an insurmountable challenge, the fact is agencies can use a combination of technology, processes, and data to address many of these challenges. From thermal imaging to adjust temperature controls to online tools for communications to notify employees to content delivery applications, agencies can create a safe and productive environment. One way agencies like the Homeland Security Department and Education Department have adapted to this current environment is they've changed the way they issue identity or PIV cards to employees. It's almost a touchless alternative, but secure technology and derived credentials. Today, we're going to hear from one agency, the Homeland Security Department, how they plan to overcome many of these concerns and challenges, reopen offices safely, and continue to take advantage of remote work innovations that have emerged over the last 6 months. Angie, I'm going to turn to you since you are the people person, so to speak. You are the person who's really trying to ensure that agencies and employees are comfortable. What is the DHS plan to return to the office? And let's walk through that decision-making process a little bit.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity to be on to speak to this really important issue for us. So as you can imagine, the health and safety of our workforce is absolutely paramount to ensuring the continuation of our essential functions. And I think it's really important to note, much like the shutdown, about 80% of DHS is frontline and is working anyhow and has been working the entire time. So this issue of that I think tends to be very DC centric around telework and all is something that is very important to us and is kind of new to us in some ways. But in other ways, we find that within DHS, we have to balance those needs with those employees that have, again, been on the front lines the entire time. So really, as COVID-19 continues to present, it's fluid, it's evolving from a safety and health concern for our employees and their families. And this has been a really key focus of ours, is not just focusing in on the employees, but what this also means for the families as well. So deciding whether and when and how to return to the office, we have decided within DHS is a very local decision. And it would include very different ways of folks to look at this, whether you're Customs, Border and Protection, TSA, or within the management lines of business, such as within the Chico office, just as an example. And so we've really based this on many factors. You have the public transportation issue that we're still exploring. You have the ability to social distance within office spaces, because as you can imagine, many of the office spaces have been condensed with hoteling and things like that. But yet today, with social distancing, we've had to come up and be incredibly innovative in how we're going to be able to get folks to be able to be back in the office and still stay safe. And then, of course, the virus stability is something that we're taking into consideration. But I would say right now, the number one concern for our employees is really childcare and the homeschooling situation. With so many of the schools in a virtual situation right now, it's really causing our employees a lot of angst over how they're going to, quite frankly, be able to not only work full-time, teach their kids full-time, and, heaven forbid, get a little bit of sleep somewhere in between. And so all of those things are the things that we're really taking into consideration as we're trying to work through these issues. There will always be certain jobs that may need to be in the office some days or very specific weeks or not for a while. And so again, because of that, what we want to do is really encourage maximum flexibility for employees. And really the motto is, and maybe it's just been a motto for a long time, but mission first, but people always is something that we're really trying to ensure is at the top of our mind. I do think over time, telework may continue, it may increase or it may decrease. But again, the answer to some of those long-term decisions is not something that we're rushing into or trying to finalize right now.
There's plenty of follow-up there, and maybe it's something for Tom or Rich to jump into, because as folks do return, and again, going what Angie has said around, for instance, the office space, how much room there is, how do you deal with the fact that so much office space has been condensed over the last 15 years or so? What from a readiness support or from a security side, how are you all looking at this return to office effort?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is Tom. I'll start out and turn it over to Rich. So that's a great question, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. And it's an issue that every agency is wrestling with right now. And in DHS, it's particularly challenging because, as you know, it's a large organization, 230,000 people nationwide. There is not a one-size-fits-all when you talk about returning to the workplace because there isn't a standard office. As Angie mentioned, we've all been going to work anyway, but in a telework structure. So as we look at when we bring employees back, I mean, obviously there's the concerns with Metro and things along those lines, and I can't control that. I mean, we purchased masks for all of our employees to distribute those, but what I can control is when they enter the office, when they enter a DHS space, and that's really the things that we're looking at are the things that everybody, including industry, are concerned with. It's social distancing. It's how do you maintain distancing in front of an elevator lobby, 2 people within an elevator, touchless buttons. And then when you get inside the office, we are largely an open office. So what we've done is we've divided our workforce up into a cohort of 30% each, roughly 33%. So we can distance within our desks, minimize conference room capacity to about 25% of what it was. Fitness centers, for instance, within buildings, limit the capacity there to 25% as we come back in. So, and then we've modified our furniture contracts to add things like screens and barriers between workstations and sanitation places and things along those lines, as well as increasing, the disinfectants throughout the office that you can do that. So we can't make it risk-free, but we can certainly make it safer than it was. And again, as Angie mentioned, it's really going to be on the individual offices. CBP is going to make their determinations. TSA is going to make their determinations. And for us, largely an office building, as well as what we're doing out at St. Elizabeth's, we'll make those determinations. But we're gonna bring folks back when it makes sense. No one has a crystal ball as to how this thing's going to evolve and when will we have a vaccine. Does that change things? But I think the discussions we've had, Jason, up till now has been, well, shouldn't we do this? Shouldn't we reduce? Shouldn't we have more size? I've got a 100 million square foot portfolio. Real property doesn't change on a dime. We need to design for the future, not for the moment. So we will fix what we have right now. We have no plans for large-scale furniture movements. But as we do construction, as we do leases, we're certainly going to look at what does the workplace of the future entail and adapt that way. But that's going to be a multi-year strategy, to be honest with you. So in the meantime, we're taking it, dealing with what spaces we have right now. And largely, it's a manage the workforce issue rather than an infrastructure issue.
Tom, there's so many pieces and parts I could dig into that, but let me bring in Rich here for a second, because from a security perspective, that plays another role in it, because there's a lot of discussion about, okay, well, when an employee returns to the office, what's going to happen from a physical security perspective? And then that will also tag us back to bringing Karen into the discussion, because that then connects back to the network and the infrastructure. But start us off with this idea of the physical security side, and Rich, jump in here.
Sure. Thank you, Jason. Like everybody else, really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. So from a physical security perspective, as Tom alluded to, there's lots of different facilities, lots of different customers and stakeholders that engage in those facilities. We've got some very public-facing facilities across the department, got primarily headquarters. So absolutely one size fits all does not work. So from a physical security perspective, along with operational security, we've put out some broad guidance to the department so that each component in each locality can implement those things as it works best for their particular mission set and the populations that go in and out of their facilities. But some things that we've done to help facilitate that return and to minimize potential exposure is, we've provided guidance with regard to contactless entry, minimizing the use of PIN entry for those facilities that don't require use of a PIN. So we've taken a risk-based approach to that. We've provided guidance for access control entry into the facilities. You may want to talk about this separately, but the screening procedures for getting into a facility. What is kind of the standard in working with the partners in the Federal Protective Service or other contract security organizations that may be at your facility. We've given guidance with regard to access to our classified spaces. Obviously, a large part of what DHS does is in the classified arena, so that has to be part of our calculus. And some of the other things that we've done to help facilitate that is, whether it's indoctrinating folks into their security, that allow them to have access. We've done that virtually so that to kind of on the theme that Angie talked about, bringing folks back very slowly. We're setting up the security system so that we don't have to bring people back in physically to get that virtual indoctrination. We've also, as you alluded to, developed what we call the Derived Alternate Credential, which allows people who may be at higher risk or otherwise don't need to come into a facility to perform their work because they're going to be primarily doing it in a remote environment. We developed a credential that allows them to get their government furnished equipment, get their credential, and to be able to get the network access without physically coming into the organization to get a personal identification card. So that's reduced the amount of folks that needed to come into to the facilities where it made sense. As Angie alluded to, a lot of our workforce across DHS is frontline employees. So they need not only the logical access, but they need the physical access to do their jobs on the front line, whether it's in the airports or whether it's on the border. So a lot of those folks have continued to have to come into the facility. So once again, not a one size fits all, but what we try to do is minimize the contact from an access control perspective, give some general guidance with regard to screening, and then continue to mitigate that and plan for the throughput increases. Whether it's at a public-facing facility or primarily headquarters facility.
I know when we had heard about the derived credentials PIV card change up in education department, I'm sure other agencies have taken that on. It was one of those really good news stories because I know for years people had, I'll use the word complained about the having to go in the office, having to prove who they are. Be able to do that remotely, I think was a real innovation. So kudos to you and the other agencies were able to kind of adapt and continue to learn. And all of this is not possible without obviously the technology infrastructure to support that. So let me bring in Karen Evans, the CIO from DHS, to talk a little bit about how you're supporting all these different needs and requirements that people like Rich and Tom and Angie are putting on top of the network.
So good morning, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with my fellow CXOs. So this is pretty exciting. This panel is pretty exciting. And I would like to say that they may not agree here, but they totally embraced me in bringing me in because my first day was June 1st. So I came on board right in the middle of all of this. So and I think Tom has said it right about the workplace for the future. And in looking at a lot of the activities and what's happening with the infrastructure, CIOs have been prepared for the workforce and the workplace of the future. the opportunity now is for us to be able to really truly demonstrate what those capabilities mean. So a lot of things that DHS did was really leverage cloud, the network infrastructure, the things that they have been moving toward for modernization. And what we've done is like, we really haven't missed a beat. Our boss, Mr. Alice, has made it really clear that DHS never did shut down, that we just moved our workforce into a more virtual environment. And with that, it adds a lot, but the network got to spin up. And so we can maintain over 120,000 concurrent VPN connections, which really then helps facilitate a lot of the issues that you're hearing from Angie, from Tom, and from Rich, as well as the security issues. And we work really closely. I want to bring up this one piece as we're talking about, how the security issues are in the physical security. The whole landscape now has changed, and the threat landscape has changed. And so this partnership that you're seeing across the board with all of us, I mean, that has changed the whole way that we're looking at what is happening within the network infrastructure as well.
Karen, there's obviously a lot to dig out there, but let me bring in our folks from Force 3 a little bit, because I want to have them a little bit respond to what they're hearing, but also what they're seeing from their customers. And maybe I'll turn to Eric to start with. Eric, your role at Force 3 obviously is around the networking and security side of it. So give me the initial reaction from what you're hearing from DHS, but also what are you seeing from your customers?
Thanks, Jason. As Jason mentioned, I am the Director of Networking and Security, and my role tends to focus around keeping people secure and maintaining work all the way through. And like everyone on the panel has mentioned, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I mean, each agency and each component has their own specific sets of challenges and directives, be it whether they have a vastly mobile workforce or a mostly in-person experience. Trying to find ways to leverage technology to enable that is the biggest challenge. Now, is that finding ways to guide people through the office using Bluetooth technology to give them a directed path, have visual presentation of building populations and their capacity on a screen so that employees can have a sense of comfort as to whether or not they're being taken care of and those physical security controls are being met. Or as Karen alluded to, now that you have 100,000 VPN users, how does that scale your network? How do you get those resources? And how do you ensure that security controls that were in place in the office are also in place at every individual's desk? Those types of challenges are where we're seeing the biggest amount of effort being put in place. And again, each one of those solutions could be a little different on a case-by-case basis.
And then quickly, Joe, just bring you into the conversation, and then before we have to take a quick break, the collaboration you see among DHS is obviously heartwarming in many ways, but in many ways it has to happen. Otherwise, cannot be a successful return to the office.
Yeah, definitely. And something Tom had mentioned, and it really resonated on the cohorts, right? Dividing the office up and limiting some of those shared spaces to 25% capacity. What I'm seeing some of my customers do is leverage the video security systems they have in place to do analytics, to do things like people counting. So you actually can have a true snapshot of the density of population. One agency I'm working with is actually leveraging their VTC conference rooms that have idle cameras to do people counting. So you're defining for each room a threshold. If the system recognizes that there's more people in that room than should be, will actually trip and notify building security, building safety to address that issue. So facial recognition has come a long way. Challenge I've seen in some of these systems is facial recognition with masks on is not something that's really been a problem previously. We're seeing that come to light now. So I know industry has put a lot of work forth to tweak the software to make it better and smarter, but it's certainly still a challenge.
If you have an iPhone, you know that newer iPhone, you know that pain of trying to you have to remember your code and get it right. But anyways, that's a whole different story. Let's take a quick break. We then can continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, a holistic approach to reopening agency offices, sponsored by Force 3 on Federal News Network.